Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Chestnut Checkers. My name is Keith Riddle here, as always, with my co-host Jordan Tampien. And today we're excited to have Greg with us, Greg Mahugh. Greg, I always start off Spokane native.
No, actually,
No?
A refugee
Okay,
from
we got to
Seattle.
ask you to leave. Sorry.
We draw the
only
line
interview
quickly.
people from Spokane.
Well, I've been here since last century. I moved
that
over
counts.
here in the fall of '92.
Fall of 92.
Yeah,
Okay.
But
So,
prior to that, it was all around the Seattle area.
were you born and raised in Seattle?
Yeah, I was actually
Okay.
born in Bremerton, but lived in Seattle since I was about 6 months old. So
I always loved like the east side and the west side. When you're on the east side, anything on the west side of the Cascades is Seattle.
Yeah.
yeah,
Like it's Renton, Bremerton, like they're actually very distinct cities and places. But growing up, it's like, oh, Seattle. That's all Seattle. But
it is all kind of growing together. you
now
know.
it has for
Like,
sure.
for sure.
You know, it used to be they were separate places, but.
Yeah. How'd you end up coming to Spokane?
A friend and I opened a business here in the auto auction business. We had grown up together, and his dad was in the auto auction business going back to the early 50s. And we saw a little opportunity over here and took it. So that's what brought us to Spokane.
Yeah, because it wasn't here yet, right? You didn't. Did you buy a business here
There-
and try to take it over, or did you start? I remember we were talking about this. I couldn't.
There was a guy had started a business.
Okay.
He didn't really know what he was doing, and he didn't have
Sounds about right.
any
Sounds like most of my friends.
credibility, and he was in trouble.
Okay.
And it's kind of a long story, but he was in trouble, and we were kind of eager to go. And my buddy had gone down to Southern California in the 80s we both worked for GE Capital for a while. And when he got back to Seattle, he prophetically said, "I'm not staying here. This place is turning into L.A." And you know, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
He was onto something,
Yeah.
so that led us east.
Nice. And this is circa 92?
Yeah.
Nice. What was Spokane like when you got here?
Yeah.
To me, it seemed sleepy and slow.
Uh-huh.
You know, I was impatient. And you know, firing up a new business, trying to get things done. And we'll get to that in a week or two. It's like, what happened to now?
Yeah.
And you know, I got used to it. You know, I didn't realize how distorted my life had become there. I say I lived in Seattle, but it continually moved further out. I was actually out in Pierce County in a place, Lake Tapps, beautiful area, which is overcrowded now too. But I realized how screwed up my life was living there, because I always had in the trunk of my car a change of clothes, like an electric shaver, something to read, you know, because you'd get somewhere, you think, I'm not driving all the way back home
Correct.
to do a reset. I'm
Yeah.
going to go meet somebody or do something, you know, and got over here and, you know, in 15 minutes you could be anywhere.
Yeah.
So rush hour was about 20 minutes long. You know, it was a much better pace of life.
Yeah, kind of when I got started in it, they always said you buy in Spokane for cash flow because the building would be worth about the same as it was when you bought it. And then when I started, it was more that mid-teens of 2000, and it started appreciating like 22%. But what was kind of an economic driver in 1992 for the Spokane area? Like, what was it like?
There wasn't nearly the level, and I can't say this scientifically, I haven't studied it, but, you know, of like tech businesses and that kind of thing. It was kind of a financial hub to the extent, you know, we like to say that, you know, Spokane's the biggest city between Seattle and Minneapolis, which I think is still true.
It's true.
Yep.
And you know, so there was banking, healthcare, and education were probably, if I was going to guess, those were the things driving it. There wasn't any real sensational kinds of business going on. It was real nuts and bolts, long-term, steady.
Meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did the car auction industry teach you?
Well, I could go on and on about that, but you know, learned a lot about making deals. I mean, as an auctioneer and being in that business, it's constant.
Were you an auctioneer?
Yeah.
So you were actually the one up there doing the auctions?
Yeah, when
cars.
we opened up, my partner and I were the only two auctioneers for a while, and it gradually grew to the point where we had a pretty big staff. And I don't do much auctioneering. I'll go out there once in a while. I'm doing a benefit auction tomorrow night for the Civic Theater, and I enjoy auctioneering, but I didn't. When I retired, I didn't go out and actively pursue anything. So I support the Civic Theater. I love what they do. Jake Schaefer's amazing talent, and what he puts together there, I'm really impressed with. So I got a soft spot for that. That's why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
What's the science behind it? I know we talk about this all the time. So Greg and I go way further back. I remember first meeting him. We're getting into our first project, and I remember walking away from my first meeting kind of trying to remember everything that we talked about because we covered so many different topics. And then I was like, did we even talk about the building? Like, I don't know if we ever actually got to the building. But I think one that I like is how you always keep grounding me and tying it back to these kind of solid lessons. But what's kind of the science behind the auctioneering, the speed of how you do it, the buyer mentality? Because I think there's a lot of stuff you have related to real estate and how we're negotiating. Like, you're helping me negotiate some of these pretty complex negotiations now, and then you always tie it back to in the auto auction it did this. But what were some of those things of why whether you talk fast or you talk how you present it, of why that model works from a negotiating standpoint?
Well, I think a lot of people. I remember the first time I saw an auctioneer working, and the thing you're drawn to is the chant, the sound of it. Yeah. And it's mesmerizing, and it's whatever your response is, it's pretty unusual. The key to auctioneering, I think, is it's a form of negotiation. It's just a really high speed form of negotiation. The chant is really something that has to become, for a good auctioneer, the chant is just subconscious, second nature. The thing you're thinking about is putting the deal together. Whatever, and that's a different premise if you're selling cars or cattle or tobacco or art or real estate. And so the pace has to be adjusted based on the skill and pace of the participants.
So have you ever auctioned off other stuff besides cars? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I've done a lot of benefit auctions, but I've never sold cattle or tobacco. And there are two other realms of auctioneering where there's a huge amount of activity with just, I don't know if they still do it this way in both, but I know to some degree they do, where you've got professional buyers and there's no fooling around. So the difference, like in a benefit auction or an art auction is you're fairly slow. I'm bid $10 million. Would you bid $11 million? Very polite. That's the Sotheby's, Christie's kind of thing. At a benefit auction, it's a little faster than that, but it's you got to kind of, if people are confused or don't understand what's going on or where you're at, they're not going to bid. So that's got to be the approach. You get into these areas like the auto auctions and the other ones I mentioned. You got professional buyers; they are ready to go. Yeah. And so, I
didn't know tobacco was auctioned.
It used to be. I've never been involved in it, but I went to auctioneer school in High Point, North Carolina.
They have an auctioneer school?
Yeah, a good one. And it was Forrest Mendenhall's School of Auctioneering, and Forrest Mendenhall passed away, but boy, he affected a lot of auctioneers. People went from all over the country to go
How
there.
long is the school?
That program was
career.
2 weeks.
2 weeks,
It was 2 weeks, and what they taught you was about the mechanics of bid calling, but also about the structure of various auctions. And, auctions were much more prevalent in that part of the country, so they were selling all kinds of things at auction. Now you have Facebook Marketplace, so you don't have, used to be people, hey, I got this furniture, I'm going to move and I need to sell it. You might take it. Jesse Owens had a place up on 17th and Freya or Ray Thor, one of the old grocery store that he was doing that kind of thing. But you just take stuff up there and sell it at the auction, and that was normal.
Yeah, and you see a lot of like vehicle, not even just vehicles, farm equipment, like those ones that you see as you're driving down to Tri-Cities, like those big auctions.
Yeah, the Booker family has got a great facility there. The Yarboroughs over in Moses Lake got a similar facility out by the and I don't know exactly who's involved in all those things, but the bookers are interesting. There's some auctioneering was always kind of a man's game. Yeah. There's some great women auctioneers, and I don't know the booker girls, but I think there's two girls that are solid auctioneers. There's a gal named Rose Bax. She and her husband are both auctioneers out of Coeur d'Alene, and they're wonderful people. And Rosie's a great auctioneer and very sought after by certain, particularly in the benefit realm. They're brilliant when they work together. But there's a lot of benefit auctions where, Rose is unique. They get all kinds of old guys like me to do it, and there's people around. But so
and it
that's
obviously
been a change.
Works. I think it would be funny to dive into that because like when I go to those auctions, I mean, they drive up a price I didn't even want to pay. And is it because you create a sense of urgency around it, or what do you think the science is?
Yeah, I kind of got off that track.
Yeah. Competition, urgency, fun. I don't know.
Urgency is a good way of describing it. You're creating a moment where it's time to make a decision. Either you're in or you're out. And either you're buying it or you're buying it, but you can't both buy it. And so that's the the thing the auctioneer wants to draw out and kind of leverage. Yeah, and that. That can happen a few different ways, and there is a seller's market, buyer's market dynamic. Mm-hmm. If the market is weak and you're struggling to get buyers, good buyers they're bloodthirsty. When they figure that out, they're ruthless. And what
would that look like? Would they just throw out their own number?
Lowball you.
So you got some item and you start the bidding at $10,000. Someone will just holler out like, "I'll give you $5,000."
Yeah,
I mean, is that
absolutely? And
okay.
And whether or not you accept that bid is up to the auctioneer. If it's ridiculously low, you kind of need to know your product to some degree. You have to have some sense about what you think it's worth. But the market will tell you, and it changes. It's very dynamic.
I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah. Well, in the auto auction game, the sellers always have a reserve price.
Gotcha.
And it's very much the norm. They're participating. They're letting you know whether they'll take that. So, for instance, if you're selling like rental cars, where they're it's a pretty consistent commodity type product, they're gonna let you know. Well, we're not going to sell those less than $15,000. That's and the price you look at on the record might be 17, but 15's it. So you want to try to get them sold. I like to say that the auctioneer's job, the seller is trying to, his job is to get all you can get. Yeah. The buyer, his job is to pay as little as you can for what you get. The auctioneer's job is just to get them both to say yes. Yeah. And that's part of what you're burning up time on when you're the chant. There's a significant portion of a lot of auctioneering where the chant is just keeping people kind of entertained. Yeah. Well, you're allowing this deal to come together. Yeah. Hey, Jordan, and you don't say it explicitly, there's shorthand, but you want 17 for this, but what I got is 15. Yeah. Well, I'll sell it for 16.
And you're in that communication during the auction with the sellers as much as you are with the buyers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I think I'm just kind of unaware of that. I always thought it was like the auctioneer was just looking to get the buyers.
That's how it works best. Sometimes you're,
or the amount going in, and it's what you can get for it, right?
Yeah, if there's just a hard stop, if he says, look, I'm going golfing and I got to have $16,000 for that thing, don't sell it for a penny less. Well, then that shortens up the conversation. Yeah, you might want to pay 15, you might want to pay 15.9, but it's 16 if you want to buy it right now. Yeah. And everything's subject to being sold out from under you. Yeah. That's the auction
the
dynamic.
Piece, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you get to that point, and you might say, hey, it takes 16 to buy it, and you say, 15.8. That's the best I'll do. And I might look around the room and say, all right, 16 will buy it right now. First $16,000 I see you, you're an owner. And that puts the heat on you. Hey, 15.8, am I going to lose this deal for $200? Right. So there's a whole range of possibilities, but that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, it's because, I mean, we never really talk about this for as much deal making as me and you do.
I'm going to start to figure out my own chant.
That's what I mean. It's like, well, I'm always thinking in my head of how I pit those two together. Like, as I'm submitting offers on a property, you're trying to use the scarcity, the urgency, the, hey, I need an offer or I need an answer by the end of the day type stuff. And so I'm always trying to figure out how you navigate that. But I've only been to the courthouse steps, I think, twice, where they sell the foreclosure properties and stuff like that. But that seemed less sophisticated and more like each buyer had their number and you kind of were going at it. But then I've watched two guys kind of just get bid up. So I've always been fascinated with the bid process.
Well, I think buying at auction, and people might disagree, but I feel like buying at auction for me always put me at a distinct disadvantage for like the skills that I had.
Yeah.
Because I think a part of what I cut my teeth in the real estate world doing was like the art of the deal, was like making a deal that would work for the seller and for me as the buyer. And negotiating those nuances a lot of times took time, or it took speech and pattern recognition, or it took mirroring and matching, or it took developing rapport over a period of a week or a month. You know, it's like, so a lot of those times wasn't like, and it was just in an auction, all that goes away. So like you said, you got to make a decision. You got to make a decision now. And really what I, as a buyer, always felt like was it just pinned me in a corner of like, okay, it's price and who the other guys here are and who's, you know.
How much money do you want to pay?
It's like, I can't develop rapport very well with this auctioneer or like.
Well,
but what you would do if you did play the auction game, I'd tell you, and I'm sure you can speak to this, Greg, but if you played the auction game enough, you did develop a relationship and rapport with the other bidders. So I would go down there and be like, hey, listen, Aaron, like I need you to lay off this one on 6. Like I really want it. And I own the 2 next door and I've got a lot that, you know, and it would be like, hey, do me a solid. And then you're got me for later.
That happens.
Just to kind of call the dogs off, right? Because all of a sudden us buyers were banding together against this evil auctioneer. Because
and you know, the auction company's role is to create a market, create a dynamic market. So you got to bring in guys who aren't friends. You know,
basically.
You know, that, you know, there's a lot of layers to it.
I'll give you $20 if you show up this week and just screw with Jordan.
Yeah, that's funny. That's what it is. Because otherwise, then you're like bidding up each other to get the price higher. When a lot of those didn't have reserves, so it was kind of whatever it went for there.
Yeah, and you know, you know, as the purist, you say, well, what's something worth? It's what somebody will pay for it.
Yeah.
That's what it was worth then. But that can change. Yeah. And, you know, the ability to evaluate the merchandise is a critical part of it. And that's where real estate, you know, there's a lot more complexity to doing that. And now there's a lot more tools that have come into like the auto auction game where, you know, photos and condition reports and stuff that's available ahead of time. But it used to be when I started, and for most of my career actually, the best performers, the most successful participants in the auto auction were people who could evaluate a car very quickly. Yeah. So you have to know what, you know, the model options are. You know, you have to be able to spot, you know, repair paintwork, you know, a good eye for, you know, prior repair and that kind of thing. And you got to have a checklist of, you know, looking inside, outside, tires, you know, the various components of the car. There's a whole bunch of things involved in evaluating the car.
Yeah.
But if you think about that same basic checklist, you know, real estate's more complex and it takes longer to really evaluate most deals, I would think. You know?
It does and it doesn't. I think that's one of the things me and Jordan have talked a bit about is, like for Jordan, it's the development of things. For me, it's always been like the fix and flip end of things. But I don't think that my skill set was necessarily honed in a need for speed, but it was honed in based upon, I think, some of the best and worst deals I probably ever made were made quickly. Right? Like I was able to get an opportunity because I made a quick decision. Someone's like, hey, you can have this, but you drive by only and I need an answer in an hour. Yeah. But you went over there and you're like, okay, it's wood siding, it's composite shingle, the windows are not, you know, like you could kind of assess those situations and go, okay, there's enough meat there. There's some unknowns, but I can make a quick decision. And it got me a really, really good deal. And the flip side of that coin was, there were sometimes when I went over there and said, that sounds like a good deal, I'll go with it. And then you all of a sudden open this can of worms where you're like, man, shit.
I wish I hadn't done that.
Right, I wish I hadn't done it. So the aha then becomes my ability to make quick decisions has both of those scenarios. So I need to be good at making them. I need to be good at making a quick decision because I need to be able to make a quick good no or a quick good yes. And so it wasn't necessarily to hurry or rush a seller or do things. It was just like, I figured out early on that was a pinch point, right? If I wasn't able to assess a house And so being able to walk into a house that was built in the 50s or built in the 30s or built in the, the 90s and be able just to know common material, common construction type, common pitfalls, things that you're going to typically run into was a good skill set to have, because then I could deal with probate attorneys. I could deal with auctioneers. I could deal with scenarios where people were looking for a quick decision and just go, hey, listen, man, that house is, a mid-70s rancher or split level. I know that it was made with T111 that has material defects, and anywhere that there's, you just kind of knew that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily, that skill set wasn't developed. And I know yours is the same with development. We don't have to go into the nuance, but like be able to look at a site, have someone flop it on your desk and say, Jordan, you can have this for $1.2 million, and to look at it in 30 seconds and be like, nope. Yeah. Just because you're like, here's the pitfalls. Yeah. I know that area. I know that soil. I know that, that neighborhood, that
and you've got to know, zoning and
all
tax.
The different things. I know that sewer's 3 blocks away because I looked at 3 other projects and but I think that skill set for us was probably built not out of necessity for speed, but just out of the what happened when you
because I'd argue I don't do speed. I try to slow down a negotiation.
Yeah, you
for
try
the most part.
But if you need to make a quick decision, I guess you have confidence in your skill set.
Yeah, like I assessed a piece of land that we're looking at putting an offer on now, and I was driving by it, and by the time I got to where I was headed, we were putting the offer. Like all I had to do was verify 3 key points. I knew the soils. To your point, I knew the zoning. I knew the soils. I knew the rental rates in the area. I knew what I could pay per door for that. And then all I was trying to think of, which concept fits this better. Do you go max density or high-end luxury? And so by the time I stopped, I'm like, yeah, that's worth this. They're overpriced.
The best deals go the fastest.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's an exception to any general rule.
Sure.
But, I would say as an auctioneer and just as somebody who's, been around a while, the stuff that lays around the longest, generally, there's my business partner's dad, who in some ways like a second father to me, but one of his lines on cars that wouldn't sell, we'd run them week after week at the auction. One of his great lines was, there's always a reason. Go look at it.
Yeah.
Go out there and see what you got. If it's not selling, there's a reason. If it looks on paper like it should be gone because it looks comparable to this other thing that sold well, there's always a reason. And the other thing that, old wisdom from the auction world and the car world, and met some characters. Loved it. It was a great career. A colorful bunch of people. Mm-hmm. But one of the other old adages that was very common is don't fall in love with a car. Figure out what you'll do and and be disciplined. As an auctioneer, you're always trying to talk people into doing something that maybe they weren't planning to do, which is bid more or sell for less or whatever. But the best buyers and sellers were disciplined. Yeah. They had a plan. They knew what they were doing. They knew why they were doing it. And most of them didn't do much adjusting on the fly. Mm-hmm. So, I've got a good friend who comes out from New York to go skiing, and he sells cars all across the country. And his ability to analyze a market, analyze product, and his discipline about how he both buys and sells is just amazing. But it sure served him well.
Yeah.
And, he's just very low-key, matter of fact about it. But the work that he does is so much predicated on just being structured and disciplined. And, you walk away from a deal. And you may look at it later and see how things roll up and think, I could have done that deal. But you don't shoot from the hip in the moment. And I don't know how that really translates to real estate, but I know in buying and selling houses,
translation.
It's a huge.
I think the lessons that we kind of come across on this podcast a lot of times across industry, but like success is simple. It's just not easy, right? Like that's a thing that recurring in my head is like when you look at people that are good at business, no matter what, it's almost kind of boring, right? They stay in their lane. They know what they do. I think for entrepreneurs and people like myself, I'm just speaking personally, is like, to have this kind of like excited personality or to want to like do it, like to get it doesn't always serve you well, right? Like sometimes the best thing to do is, like I said, those guys that don't really get excited, that just kind of, they'll pay the price they pay. It's like, that's like, to me, I'm like, that's not fun and sexy and exciting and cool. And also it's like, yeah, but like they know their margin and they make whatever, $1,000 a car every time they buy and sell a car, and they can do it for, 100 years. And you're like, well, that model is great. And it's like when I look at my career, it's like huge win, downfall, win. And it's like you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off sometimes. And then you finally get to an age where you're like, God, this behavior doesn't serve me well, right? Or this action doesn't. It's like, okay, so we're going to take our time. We're going to be patient. We're going to analyze the deal. And I think that some of that's just growing up and some of that's learning, but a lot of it's just learning where your behaviors and whether you call it a personality or behavioral traits pay you well and where they don't. And for me, I probably learned at a young age that like an auction type environment for me was not conducive for Keith to perform the best. Because I do get wrapped up in emotion, or I do get like excitable, and so it's like, man, it's not always going to happen well or bad, but it's a place where I can stumble. That like, if I take my time and I'm in my office and I'm analyzing a spreadsheet, it's probably much more likely not to occur.
Well, I think the education you get from walking away from a deal is education you can't get any other way. Yeah. If you really want something, I've shared this with young people that I know. When they're thinking about buying a house and that's this overwhelming decision, is don't be afraid to lose a few. Yeah, I know you're in love with it. You've already imagined living there and, barbecuing in the backyard and all the great things about that. But don't be afraid to walk away, because you'll know, the deal you described where you knew and were making the offer from the car. That's the only way you can competently and confidently get to that place, is to pass on a few deals and see how it rolls up. You're a better educated buyer then, and you're ready. You're ready when you see the deal that's going to go quick. You're ready to move quick and take advantage of it. I think. Mm-hmm. And so there's, that's how you learn.
Yeah, it's repetition for sure.
But the old question, what am I missing? I had a good friend. He's passed away now. He used to buy cars for a Ford store out of Bremerton. And he was an interesting guy, very philosophical, unusual guy for a used car manager in a lot of ways. But he shared with me one time, he says, as soon as you say sold, he says, I hate the deal. I think, what did I miss? Yeah. He's got all these doubts. He said, and he said, usually the one I'm most worried about is the first one to sell. But there is a reflex there that's interesting in the auction environment that, from a buyer's standpoint, I don't know that everybody experiences that, but I thought it was an interesting comment from him.
Yeah, I mean, because all the guys ahead of me always just said it's in the buy. Everything's in the buy. You win in the buy, not in the sell. And to a point, I agree with that. I think it's also, there's just so many nuances to a real estate deal.
I think it's not that you always win in the buy. I think that is the surest way to not lose, is to make sure your buy is right? Yeah. But I mean, I've definitely bought things wrong and won.
Oh, yeah.
I've definitely had a different scenario, but I think it's the surefire way to make sure that you don't get off track is to buy it right.
Yeah, and I think it goes into how your assumptions and how they're developed. I think we were talking. Greg and I are doing the Kinixu project, Priest Lake one up there, and we're going through it. But we were 4 months ago. We were meeting, or 3 months ago, and we were just talking about it today. But he says, "Yeah, I mean, we can base our assumptions for phase 2 on this, but like, what happens if a war breaks out?" And then sure enough, like 2 weeks later, the Iran thing and
there's a war
rates
on.
are going back up again. And I was like, man, it is so true. And so on that level of saying no, how much certainty do you think you need to pull a trigger on an investment? Because I was looking at it in a pro forma, there's a lot of assumptions, from rental rates to expenses to pretty much everything in a development pro forma is an assumption. It's based on a comp today that won't be delivered for 18 months. So like when you're looking at a deal, how much certainty do you need on that deal? And maybe flipping's a little different because the timeline's slower, but what do you think on yours? Like how much certainty do you need on a deal to move forward?
I mean, I would say not much. And the only reason I say that is because, like, again, there are so many factors that are outside your control, but also this is a player's game. Like, you don't win, you don't make money if you don't play. And so I think one of the things that I've learned is like being comfortable in your own skin. So going back to your friend that I would consider maybe a boring auction buyer, right? He stays in his lane, he knows his thing or whatever. I think that being good at business or being good at what you do also has to do with having kind of enough alligator skin or thick enough skin to kind of ignore what other people think about you or say, or not to entirety, but I think there's a lot of our perception of what people think about us. And I'm sure auctioneers know that, right? You get people excited and it's like, I don't want to lose here. There's more going on than just the price.
Yeah.
But I think we do that to ourselves in our own business dealings. And so I think when I am confident in a deal or I look at a deal and it makes sense to me, I don't need huge amounts of guaranteed or security to make that deal happen, which I see for me, I see a lot of people as their downfall. I see a lot of people lose out on a lot of opportunity because they're so hesitant to pull the trigger. They want all this security. They want that warm blanket over them. It's like, there's no way you're going to lose. And here's your 5 different outs. And it's like, for me, I'm like, yeah, but I've done 8 deals by the time the guy does 1.
Yeah. That's a bond buyer.
A bond buyer.
I mean,
right.
that's
Yeah, it should be. Yeah.
And part of what you're talking about leads to the question of ego. Yeah. Are you doing this? You want to see a great example of ego driving a market? Watch Barrett Jackson, or those Mecum auctions. Those shiny, beautiful, rare collector cars and all that. And every once in a while, you get somebody, and they're probably just playing with money they can afford to lose. I don't think it's somebody who's betting their grocery.
It's not their
funds,
grocery money.
On the deal. They're wealthy people, but a part of what the auctioneer is tapping into there, and not in a predatory way. I mean, he's taking advantage of what's available. It's a big ego, and I'm going to buy that Chevelle, not you. And if somebody's got that attitude. It
becomes about winning or not losing, right? More than it becomes about the price when you have the money.
I can't remember the guy's name, but recently, just in the last few weeks, there was a guy who passed away, and he had a collection of amazing stuff, like, handwritten notes from Beatles, songs or Dylan songs being developed, guitars. I think he had one of, David Gilmour's guitars that's brought a lot of money. I think he had a drum head from one of Ringo's early drums, maybe one that was used on the Ed Sullivan Show, 60 years ago, and things like that. I mean, he had amazing memorabilia, and they're selling this stuff. Well, there's only one of those. Yeah. So who's the guy? It might not be the guy with the most money that ends up with it. It might be the guy with the ego that needs to have it and has got the money to throw at it. And, that's part of the game, too.
Yeah.
In business, I think ego is it's a toxic element.
It's tough.
It's, that's where actually boring and disciplined probably in the long run pays better.
Well, and I think ego can, I'm always looking at both sides, but I think for me, it's like having enough ego to be confident in my decisions and not necessarily care what everybody else is thinking about my decisions or what I'm doing. But not having too much ego where you're just doing it for the sake of ego, right? Yeah. And I think that's, for me, I guess, when you ask about the security thing, going back to that would be, are you okay getting smacked in the mouth or having something not work out and not making it crush your soul or make a bunch of meaning about it and like, woe is me, I lost on one and this is, for me, I think that's the hard part, right? Is I would say, for the most part, I've been able to experience more wins than losses. Obviously, I wouldn't be here in the same industry. But yeah, those ones that happen, and you kind of got to be able to shrug them off, And I think that's what I've noticed about the tried and true kind of what you'd call it, like endless investors, is I don't know, how do you deal with the losses, right? Yeah. I mean, that becomes something we talk a lot about on this podcast, is because it's like inevitably they happen, and you can write a story or make it mean a whole lot more than it's supposed to. Or you can kind of like get back to what you're good at and make another deal. And I think that to me is the balance with the ego.
Yeah, I suppose
right?
if it makes you, just reluctant to do a deal, where you start worrying and you're, develop a neurosis around, what could go wrong. Yeah, I think that might be an indication you're in the wrong game.
Yeah.
There's some people that. I've watched great deal makers, I've met a lot of them, but I think of, episodes of where it'd be with somebody and the phone will ring and they, there's no chit chat. There's, listen to some things and fire off a number. Mm-hmm. What was that? Oh, I'm just bidding a truck. They're buying cars that way. Yeah. They hasn't seen it, didn't ask a lot of questions, got somebody who's looking at it, told them what it was, this, that, and going back to that, T111 signing, the whole thing. They know what they've got their assumptions, and those critical assumptions already baked into their thinking. And okay, that's what it is. I'll pay this for it, and they're good for it. Yeah. Otherwise, their phone quits ringing.
Right.
So, when the guy calls back, says you got it, you got to write the check, you own it. But in the thing about the car business is there's this volume of activity. So the wins and losses, the ratio may be similar, but it's made up of a whole bunch of smaller deals. And so there's a lot of practice in just the deal making for everybody involved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard one about the real estate one is it takes repetition. So somebody asked me they should flip their first house, and I was going through this part of the repetition game thinking, would I be better off flipping a house or working for 3 years for Keith and building building that expertise, building those assumptions without having that dollar amount be the risk? Because I think that's what I've seen more times than not is the ones they finally get off the fence, they go flip the first house, it loses. And then not only loses, but then it hits ego, it hits pocketbook, it hits all the things, and then they're just done. And I think some of mine could have been mitigated if I would have gone and worked for a company that syndicated funds, did all that already, and then you see, hey, look, this is how it's done. It's just not my personality. My personality is to go dive in, try it. If they can do it, I can do it type thing. And I think that's the one I'm more cautious on the advice I give towards that. Jump in, get your feet wet and go versus, hey, if you really want to do this, there's enough information, there's enough people, there's enough value you could add to do it. But like the difference is, but if I wouldn't have done some of these smaller rehabs, like now I can walk through most buildings and be like, all right, I know how much that molding is. If we switch to rubber base over a trim, I know how much that'll cost. I know how much it'll cost to replace it when a tenant damages it. And so it's this repertoire at the age of 40. And so I'm working on one deal right now that could make up for all the losses. And to your point of, I think too many people treat real estate like a car sale. This short-term, quick win. Did I win? And sometimes you don't even know. Like when we're talking about Lolo Lofts, you don't even know if you won today.
Yeah, you got to ride it for a while.
All of a sudden, Micron announces they're moving their second plant here, and the closest proximity is a downtown spot, and values jump, right? And I think that's where real estate, to me, it's tough to judge on a daily basis.
Well, anytime you're judging anything in a moment in time, you're judging it in that moment in time, right?
Yeah.
Like I've joked about this forever, but it's like I feel like my legacy, or all of ours, it's to some extent, whether my grandkids look back and say my grandpa was an idiot or a genius, will completely be indicative of like what the real estate market did during my lifetime, right? Like if you were a Rockefeller when like oil hit or when coal was going, like there's all these people like Carnegie's or Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and it's like, were they a genius or were they just in the railroad at like the right decade, or the right, and it's like, that's gonna be the same thing for me.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm 95 and the real estate market just goes,
try to exit
and
the
I go
portfolio.
BK, they're gonna be like, Grandpa was a cool guy, but he was kind of an idiot. And if it's I'm worth $100 million, and be like, man, he was a genius. Yeah, he was so smart. He was so smart, always looking in the right direction.
One of the other sayings I heard from an old friend years ago was, a hot market can make any idiot look like a genius for a while, and that's exactly what you're talking about. And I was raised by an engineer, so I guess I'm indoctrinated with a little bit of that kind of thinking. But every system has a point of failure.
Yeah.
Every structure has a point of failure. Everything can fail. Yeah. So the question, part of those underlying assumptions in making a deal, a real estate deal, is, or any deal for that matter, but we're talking about real estate, is what are those underlying critical assumptions? Because they add up to this sort of algebraic equation, which is the deal I'm doing. So when this variable changes, how does that affect the outcome? Yeah. And the common variables, cost of construction, interest rates, market rents or market values, the whole thing, wraps around this kind of algebraic equation. And, you just got to look at all your variables and say, I think, and I'm probably a little tedious in this way. It's best if I have somebody to counterbalance my tedious bias, but how does that affect the deal?
Yeah.
And at what point do we run out of answers to respond if this moves against us?
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to think about that. No, that's that can't happen because I might fail if that. I think there's the point of failure. The 2009 and 10. we watched car dealers going out of business
Oh, yeah.
right and left. It was devastating. And it was, the spike was dramatic, but the duration of that trough. Yeah. And the sad thing was you watch somebody
5,
who had
6 years probably.
Yeah, and I would say you could probably graph it based on how much leverage they had
The
working
business
against
had.
them. Yeah, how much?
Don't you have a lot of leverage in the car industry in theory with
Well,
the
you
floor
had-
model, basically buying the inventory?
Well, but they floor it,
Okay.
which means they're borrowing the money for it. But, the ones who owned their inventory survived.
Yeah.
The ones who had everything financed were the first to fail. Yeah. But the sad stories were 12, 18 months into that debacle, watching guys go down that had held on that long.
Yeah.
And they'd probably thrown every penny on the table trying to, it's things have got to improve. Things have got to improve. Well, they did eventually improve.
Yeah.
It was just 3 years later.
It
5
was,
years later.
they couldn't hold on that
Yeah.
long.
Yeah, and there's some truth to that too. And I think that is one of those scenarios where there's a lot of analysis that goes into a deal. And then there's also like when the gun goes off at the start of the race, like once you're in a deal, it does change, right? Because the decisions have been made to some extent.
Now you got to finish it.
And I think whether, development's a big, longer project. I mean, like, like Garland project was a 3-year deal before you're even leasing, right? So but as soon as you borrow the money or break ground or do whatever, but I think all of those deals, and so what I've tried to do is always just kind of at that point in time, it's kind of a bit like a gun going off at a race. Is like you just focus on the task at hand. Yeah. Like if I'm in it, I'm in it. And now there's a lot of things I can't control. I don't know if a war is going to start in the middle of it. I don't know, but I know that I got to get this done, and I just got to put my head down and I got to go. I think I'm always analyzing deals up until that gun goes off, and then after that gun goes off, it's like at this point I just got to get the work done. I got to do what I got to do to get this thing to the finish line because there's so many variables out of control. And I mean that's a tough one with resonating with those guys going down because it's like I think that's one of those moments. And when I think about an economic downturn like you're talking about, whether it was 08, 09, or even this more recent one that we had, is you don't know how long that's going to take, and you don't know where the end is. If I'm building an apartment or if I'm flipping a house, I know like I got to weather this storm, but you kind of know where the finish line is. I think with an economic downturn, that is a hard part as a business owner or an entrepreneur. It's just like, how far are you willing to go, or do you go to try to hold on or save or wait for the turn back? And I think that's one of those, I don't know, again, might be one of those grandkids, the grandpa's a genius, he's an idiot, but you just, I don't know. That's always a gut check for everybody, I think.
Yeah, one of the hardest hits I took during the whole time was I just finished an apartment down in Boise. Probably the worst loss I took on one. What we had just finished, this is 22, we're breaking ground, so it's supposed to be delivered 23. We have issues with the main disconnects not showing up at it. Builder was behind by 4 months, so the sale basically blurred into when rates jumped to 8.
Yeah.
And I'm in a 10% construction private debt fund, right? Yeah. So I'm staring down the barrel of this gun of rates are dropping. Units that I was building, so we're selling for $375 a door. We're now not even getting entertained at $250. And so I'm sitting in this spot accruing, so $10 million loan, 10%, $100,000 a month, plus default or extension fees and stuff. So I'm basically $120 a month. And I'm like betting on, do rates drop so I can actually refi this, or do I sell to this buyer and write $1 million check to walk away? And then literally wrote the check and walked away because I was like, I don't know how, and luckily did because rates didn't drop for another 26 months.
It would have taken you down.
I would have been 2.6+ million carrying the thing. Lease ups were slow. Rents were $300 under projected because so many units flooded the market. And so there were those scenarios of like, wow, that sucked, lost it. And then as I plug into the new ones, it's like, well, I just had bad debt. Get better leverage, longer leverage, so I'm not forced to build and sell something. But for 8 years, I built and sold everything. But it's that weird, like, where do you call it quits? Like, sometimes the ego makes you hold on to something even longer than you're supposed to.
Cut your losses and move.
Yeah.
There's all these facets to, you got to be able, you got to have a rounded game. I talk about basketball players can do this, do that. But you got to be able to play the whole game in any game, including this one.
Yeah. Because the reality is it's worth probably $15,000 more right now than what I sold it for. $20,000 maybe a door more. So it's not like it would have even jumped.
It wouldn't be okay now.
It wouldn't even be okay now is the thing. And so I think those were some where the ego had me hold on to some things, just thinking, no, it's right on the other side. There's no way this could keep lasting. And then it did. It just kept lasting. And you're like, wow, rents are tough. You're going to be feeding these beasts for a little while. So, but yeah, I think that resonated a little more of like somebody like, think of that, 18 months. But if you would have tried to hang on for another 10, 12, you're still, we're 3 years out from recovery.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic because you're talking about like losing the battle to win the war.
Yeah.
Right. Analogy.
Yeah.
And so I think there's also those times when you get in those scenarios where you know you're going to lose the battle. So now it's like, well, how can I minimize my losses while I lose this battle to fight another day?
Yeah.
You know, but I think even that comes from an aha in the moment of like where things are at. I think going back to what you were talking about is you're also making those decisions without that knowledge.
Correct.
You know?
Well, and you don't know. Like I think I've said this last time, but Joel was telling me when he was doing the special forces stuff, he said usually during that big part is where they lose people is when they just tell you to run.
With no end.
But you don't know if it's 1 mile, 10 miles, 2 days, 1 week. It's just run. He goes, that's where everybody gets lost. And I think it was one of those pieces as you go through it, and you're like, man, that's exactly it. And you're set. You almost have to make this snapshot decision with a lot of this assumption around where it's at. And I think, luckily, I did. I mean, kind of the idea there was, all right, let's shift to save the good ones we have. Let's offload anything bad and just write the check to get there. And so, fortunately, it'll be decent on the other side of it. But I just remember sitting in that moment thinking, what a failure. Well, how did you even get to here? And then it's like, wow, if I would have just sat in that longer and let ego,
It would have gotten worse.
Yeah, it would have gotten way worse. It would have crumbled. Everything would have crumbled behind that one project.
Another great old car dealer saying from a wise old truck trader out of Alberta. But what did he say? When it's bad, it always gets good, and when it's good, it always gets bad. Yeah. But nobody rings a bell when it changes. You know, you got to figure that out, and you just don't know that. You know, the timing is, you know, markets always cycle, and things always change, and prices always go up. I mean, there's a whole discussion about, you know, currency and government stuff that, of course, prices go up. Yeah. So, you know, did value go up? I think, you know, and there's a part of me that looks at you got to, you know, evaluate value separately from price. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Price is in the, you know, they're in the context of what's going on. You know, these, you know, in the last few years, we saw all these prices go up on, say, homes. My house used to be worth $300,000, now it's worth $600,000. Well, what does $600,000 buy? It buys what $300,000 used to buy any way you spend it. Yeah. So your value of your house did not go up, but you know, the value, the yardstick we use.
The price stick. The price went up. The value didn't go up.
Yeah. And so, you know, but, you know, what's the price of eggs? What's the price of milk? What's the price of a pair of shoes or a car? Or, you know, and they don't move in lockstep, but by and large, you know, you know, what's the price of 2 burgers and fries and a couple of Cokes at the drive-thru, you know? Yeah. And, you know, all those things you look at and think, it's all twice as much.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think you just find those ones that are hedges. The reason real estate stands up so well is that you can lock that rate. So like your cost doesn't necessarily, but your taxes do, insurance, cost to maintain them. But like you can fix some of those pieces. Somebody said they said, oh, you know, I'm going to beat inflation. I'm just going to go buy 15 cases of toothpaste. I'm just going to store the stuff I can keep here because no matter what toothpaste does in the future, I've fixed my price. Yeah. And I'm back. I can own it here. And I'm like, oh, that is actually the general concept. Yeah. Is that you're fixing your price. So you're trying to find assets that you can fix a price on or fix that piece. But yeah, that's funny. I'm like,
I wish I could remember the exact numbers, but I saw an economist the other day talking, and he was talking about same thing we're talking about. But he's like, hey, if there's 10 apples in the market and there's $10, and every apple's worth $1. But he said the thing that we keep doing is we keep printing money. Yeah. So all of a sudden we print $10 more. He's like, there's still 10 apples in the market, but now there's $20 in the market. So each apple's worth $2. Well, the apples didn't get more expensive. Yeah. There's just more money in the market, right? This is how inflation occurs. Now, the part I can't remember, and I wish I could, was he was talking about, it was like since a certain point in time, which was like, I think the 50s or 40s to today, how much we have actually reduced our
buying power.
We've reduced our use of certain things and increased our output. So, for example, like food, we can grow food. Actually, we can grow massive amounts of more quantity of food for like with less water and with less soil and with less but yet food is way more expensive. And so he said, well, it's because it's the money you're printing. And I can't remember the number, but it was like, I don't know, 36 times the amount of money is in circulation now than there was like 60 years ago or something. And I'm making that up, but I'm saying it was something like that. And you're just like, that's the aha. Yeah. You're like, man, this is, and again, this brings into so many more different lights of these conversations of like, well, because what you're trying to do as a business owner and entrepreneur, which I think is what me and Jordan speak a lot about or two, is in chess, not checkers. How are you playing the game a little differently? How are you looking at it as a chessboard and how you can move the pieces instead of just, playing a more simplistic game of checkers? And I think when we look out in the market at people that we respect or admire or appreciate or just even are curious about, like, how did they do it? How did they build their empire? How did they get to where they are? You start having these conversations. And I think it's still so hard to put your thumb on it because we can talk about best practices and we can talk about like, hey, you got to kind of stay in your lane and you got to maybe live that more boring life, or you got to, but there's also like, what do you do if a war breaks out? How can I stop the government from printing money? Yeah. How do I, so that's the problem is, I don't know that we have all the solutions, but there's just so much more that goes into the entrepreneurial life or business or success than just the nuts and bolts, because there's all these things. And so you're like, yeah, I used to be worth nothing. Now I'm a millionaire. Well, guess what? Everyone's a millionaire. And things cost $2 million. So you really are the same.
Millionaire means nothing.
Yeah. So the millionaire thing doesn't mean anything. So then you're having this whole conversation and on facing all of this stuff. And it's like, it becomes daunting, right? It becomes daunting. And I think what I lean into is going back to like, listen, you can control what you control. Yeah. So I got to just kind of focus where I can focus. I got to put my head down and I just got to say, listen, I know what I know and I can do what I can do. And all of this other stuff I can't. And hopefully I can hedge my way there slowly, right? Increase my familial situation and long-term help I joke around making my kids rich, right? Like I'll never see this stuff. If I can get a generation or two down the road a little better off or something. But, that's one of these things that I think I've learned the most out of this podcast or talking to people like yourself is like, you have to kind of have some faith in what you're doing, I guess.
Yeah.
And
you said something that I think is really important is, there's a lot of things to worry about, but if you can't control it, worrying about it's probably not a good use of your energy or your time. Yeah. I mean, that goes back, that's biblical. Yeah. That's old wisdom, but it's hard to do.
So how do you draw those lines for yourself personally? Like, how do you decide what you can control and can't control?
I'm probably not very good at it. I'm subject to laying awake in the middle of the night worrying about stuff, and not constantly, but it comes in episodes. And, I probably have, most of my life had a very unreasonably high regard for my own ability or whatever, thought I could do this, I can do that, I should. And I look back at times and think, man, I was so ill-equipped. What was I thinking? And, did things and sometimes, I had some pretty, tough episodes of, you want to call it failure. That sounds pretty final. But, not doing well at times and other times doing very well, and realize, just as I think you alluded to this, but sometimes what makes the deal good or bad were factors that you had no control over.
Yeah.
But I've always, I only played football for a couple of years when I was pretty young, but, I think of the dynamic of, if you're not in the game and you're not playing hard, you're never going to fall on a fumble. Yeah. But if you're out busting your ass in practice and you're on the team and you're starting and you're in the game, if there's a fumble, you got a much better chance of landing on it. Yeah. And so sometimes, our best deals are the fumbles we recover. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's not a good analogy, but to me it sort of makes sense that, if you gotta just have a plan and then you've got to improvise. But a great philosopher, Mike Tyson, said something, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, or something like that. Yeah. And I think that's true. You got a plan, you got to go out and risk getting punched in the face. And when you do, then what? Then you find out, okay, what are you made of? Yeah. You're gonna stay on your feet and keep fighting, or you're gonna fall down and give it up. So,
yeah, I don't do a good job of that either. Just went to that Arizona and
Getting punched in the mouth, or
I get punched a lot, so it's easier.
Which part do you not do?
The kind of separating the two. But I think that was the greatest thing that happened for me was when you separate out what you can't control. And I think too many times we think we have control of stuff, and that's what drives insanity, because you think you should be able to control how this reacts or how something reacts. And then you realize at the end of the day, you can control your attitude. You can control how you react to a situation. You can control your next step. And
I think
your
this
actions.
second economic downturn, my big aha out of it, because I lived through the 08, 09, but young, right? Yeah. Didn't really get smoked or hit hard, but saw it. Said, I'll never be that guy. And then, decade or two later, like, oh my gosh, is this going to be the time I'm that guy?
This is what happened.
But regardless, like, I had to make a conscious decision at some point of like not tying my identity to the outcome, right? And I think that was kind of a switch for me. It was like, got good kids, you got a pretty good life, you got, like, hey man. And that was probably the first time, right? I'm embarrassed enough to admit it. It was like I was like 44 years old before I finally I removed my identity from business success, because it was just like, hey, there's so many things going on here, and I think I got a plan, and if it comes out, but I also in a good enough way to say, like, even if you do come out of this, Keith, don't tell yourself this story, you're a genius, right? Or don't rely on that, because I think at some point, I would turn that question back to you, Greg, and go, when you look back self-reflectively, and you can see those moments in your life where you're maybe like way overconfident in your ability, your skill, and do you look back on those with like kind of like a humbleness and some embarrassment, or you look back on it and kind of like smirk and laugh and go, yeah, but this kind of got me where I was too, right? like was that ignorance something that you're like, I was a dumb kid, but thank God I was that dumb and ignorant, or I probably wouldn't have been making those moves? Or do you look back and go, I'm kind of embarrassed that I did that stuff when I was that ill-equipped?
Probably more grateful.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I've had a great life, and it's not like everything's gone, the way that I would have wanted. But I'm glad I did things. I'm fortunate to have been around some really talented, great people, and my former business partner, a real great entrepreneur, and we very different kind of temperaments and areas of focus, and so from a business standpoint, that's a big part of that story. But I look at some of the stubborn kind of fights I got into, and I think if I hadn't had that kind of whatever it is, that sense of belief in myself, I wouldn't have hung in there to ultimately look back and say, hey, that I came out on top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, there's a little of both, but by and large, I'm glad that I was and am, who I was and am. And there are times I think about, I love playing music. I playing a couple of bands and do some other things musically. And, I think, I don't know where that came from. It's become a real, dominant part of how I spend my time anymore. And I think, think of the early times I got up on a stage and tried to play or sing or do something. I think, I'm sure glad that wasn't recorded.
Like our first few podcast episodes.
Right. Thank God that was in my garage.
But you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And that was the start.
Yeah, and it's hard because when things are hard, you just want the fastest way out of them. And somebody used to always say that you got to sit in the hard. I hated that statement. I've never understood it. Always block it out. I'm like, no, just fix the hard. Why would you sit in something hard? And I think going through this last couple of years, it was like sitting in that, but then don't waste that time, because it won't be the rest of your life. Like, sit in that and understand. Like, I think where the big miss is the people that think I worked my way out of that. My biggest mistake would be to think I worked my way out of this situation instead of what did I learn in those pieces that make the most sense. And so now I'm like so grateful for every piece. Like that piece of land, I'm like, I already know the lender and who's going to do it. I know who's going to do this part. I know how I can help. I know what it's going to do to benefit it all. And I can put those together so fast. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't gone through this exercise. I just remember like when it first happened, I'm like, oh no, I'll just go talk to one of my buddies, have them write a check for this thing. And they said no. And I'm like, what? What do you mean no? Like, look, we're going to fix this thing. We're going to be out. And I was like, the first year was resentful of it. The second year was like, well, that's not going to help. What can I learn from it? And it was since then that I'm like, man, every day I do this exercise. I think I said it last time, where I'm like, all right, if I wouldn't have gone through that, what's something today that happened because I went through it? And then I write it down. And there's usually something, 1 to 2 things every single day that but for that. Simple things like selling my house and moving downtown. So then there's a relationship where some guy I meet that is a retired doctor that just wants to talk to somebody in the Brick West Plaza that I would have been racing back home just to get back and see Lola. Whereas now I have that extra 2 hours. And so it's really changed how I look at everything of like this terrible thing that happened. Yeah, it's still working through it, but I take those moments and it's like this, my own gratefulness exercise of, but for these situations, what would that look like? And now it's like, all right, every day a door is going to open, a conversation is going to happen, a project's going to happen, a project won't happen, but you don't take that as wins, losses anymore. It's just this constant journey through life of gratefulness for going through life and how can you help others. So it's been super interesting, but you see how somebody could take it both ways and just completely shut down from it or use it as a catalyst in their life. But you just won't know it in that moment. It'll be a 5-year look back, a 10-year look back.
Yeah. I think there's a healthy way of compartmentalizing. I don't, I'm no psychologist.
Fill me in.
Yeah. But and I don't think any of us can really do it perfectly, but I think it's that, you have to sometimes be really intentional about looking around for, the basis for gratitude. It's always there.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of cliche stuff about how the most, money can't buy happiness. The most important things aren't bought with money. You hear a lot of that. Well, maybe some of those comments were born out of people who were dealing with the reality that this game I was playing that is, the scoreboard's measured in money. Mm-hmm. I'm not winning. Yeah. And
what are you making that mean about yourself?
Yeah.
As a person, right?
Yeah. So
and I think that's something that you can get real twisted around real quick.
Yeah. I remember Daniel Kahneman on a podcast, and talk about a deep thinker. He was a deep thinker. But talking about studies they'd done on money, and I think this study was probably 20 or more years old now, but they were talking about money and happiness. And he said and this is a guy who's done a lot of research at that point, and he said, up to a point, there's a strong correlation. So when your needs are met, he said, I've never seen a graph flatten out so absolutely. And this was based on a lot of study, I believe. Mm-hmm. But he said, and at that point, it was $60,000 of income a year. Now it's probably 20 or more years ago. So I don't know what the current number would be, 120 today, I suppose. But he said, it just flattens out. More or less doesn't change happiness. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, you double your monetary value. You don't necessarily double your happiness, right?
Yeah.
It's like you double your monetary value and your happiness goes bloop.
Yeah, maybe it's
incrementally at a certain
Right.
point. It's probably this lockstep till a certain point.
And you hear it all the time, unfortunately at funerals and memorial services or after somebody's experienced some sudden abrupt loss. It's like all the things that I thought were important, that's not what was important. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we spend our time on, playing the game, mm-hmm. which I think is completely normal too. Yeah. That's what we're doing. But, there's things that sort of rearrange your perspective on that. And I think that in a way is what you're describing. It's kind of healthy learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a correlate or a relation there between a lot of things, and I don't know what the difference is, but there's a lot of things I think that we do that's playing the game. It could be chess, it could be going fishing. What's interesting is how they don't necessarily tie to our identity as much, right? Like if I lose to you at chess tomorrow,
that's funny.
I might be a little angry, but like I would never go home and lose a lot of sleep over it or be like, man, you're such a loser. Like, you
lost
know what I
to
mean?
Jordan chess.
But with money,
Bobby
the money
Fischer.
game, you really you tie a lot of that to your identity. I think that's, for me,
Yeah.
there is definitely I don't know what it is, but there's definitely a difference between what we decide the importance of winning or losing a specific game mean about our persons or ourselves, and money just happens to have a really high regard, I think societally and with a lot of people.
And it's easier to measure. You can tell with money.
Yeah, but if I go fishing and don't catch any fish, that's pretty easy to measure.
Yeah.
I'm just not at home telling myself I'm a total PO. Well, maybe for like the first hour.
Yeah. It's a waste of time.
Until I get that second beer in me, and then I'm okay. But, yeah, but I think I don't go home and you know, I'm not angry with my kids or you know, closed off or whatever that I see. You can see a lot of people's unhealthy behavior around the monetary wins and losses where you're like, man, you're not enjoying. Now the irony is you're not enjoying the actual joys of life.
Correct.
Right? Because you're pissed off about this imaginary game that we all created called money. You know?
Exactly. And it keeps you in that rat race of trying to make more money, and you think the next dollar is going to be the best dollar. And I don't think that's always the case with it. Like when I had to write that check, all of that flashback in my head were the like 2 a.m. painting doors on flip houses and the like every dollar that got me there. And I gave myself like 5 minutes to mourn it. And then I'm like, nope. Like so on my quest to build this thing, I'm going to have these setbacks. And the question is, are any of those the kind that derail the whole ship? And I think that's where Seth Godin talks about sunk costs. And I think in life, we try to the big one is like, I went to law school. I literally passed the bar. I don't know if you guys knew that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I sunk a ton into educate all those things. I've never once practiced law. And it's one of those pieces where I could have sat and dwelled on it, but then I was like, but that's not my future happiness. And I think too many times past activities or endeavors or investments start dictating where that journey goes instead of using it as the experience or that next piece that drives, I don't know, whatever that next discussion is. And so it took me a little bit to go over because I was like, man, I put in so many hours to make this much money to do this. And I was like, okay, well, now I just learned a lesson that hopefully saves me $5 million on the next one, because we're not going to make those 3 mistakes again. And so it's just super interesting. But my tie to money was just we didn't grow up with a lot of it. So when you lost $1, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. And so then it was like, so then you lose one, and it was just like, it was almost your own internal battle against that versus like being able to capture the lessons taken from it. What did I do wrong? What should I have done better? What should I have communicated? It was more like I lost the $1. And I'm like, so I've gotten a better relationship with money that way. As a tool more than an identity.
Yeah, I think that, well, we've talked about it, taking some off the table, sort of having a plan for before I hit that point of failure, what am I willing to accept? Yeah, I remember when I moved to Spokane, basically had a little bit of money and sold literally everything I owned, put it into the business. I showed up in Spokane driving a car that I'd paid $1,200 for, which was not a good Spokane car, and I had the one that cost
$1,200. I'm sorry, is $1,200 an expensive car then or not?
No, it wasn't. It was a cheap car, but a $1,200 car 35 years ago would probably be a $9,000 or $10,000 car today.
Okay,
I mean, roughly speaking. Maybe I don't know. I'm not out there looking at them every week. But having said that, I sold everything I owned. I had a house that I lived in, had some equity in it. Had a rental house, my first house that I had some equity in. Sold both of those. I had a ski boat. Had a couple of toy cars, convertibles, and a little Porsche, and sold everything. Moved into a rental house, or initially moved into the Ramada, but so. And I remember telling my ex-wife, my wife at the time, that her parents had some acreage down by Vancouver, Washington. I said, if this doesn't work, we're going to be living in a travel trailer in the back of your parents' property.
Right.
So
we're committed.
I was motivated. I worked 7 days a week. I remember I was so twisted in those first couple of years that it's like, Thanksgiving, Christmas, great days to go to work. The phone didn't ring.
Yeah.
And I'm not good at balance. I've had psychologists tell me, you're not good at self-care. So I think I'm a selfish pig. I kind of take good care of me. It took a while for me to figure out what they were referring to, and they were right. That as soon as I kind of get, I'm like a dog. As soon as I get my squirrel in sight, everything else goes out the window. Exercise, diet, sleep, relationships, everything. And these were not healthy practices, but I'd get the tunnel vision and just go obsess on things. And when I don't do that, I find that I'm probably ADD and I am scattered all over the place. It's like, well, somewhere in between might be a better place to land, but I haven't really figured. I think I'm getting better at it, life is a constant learning process. That was something that I guess I probably picked up from my dad. But
Well, I think a lot of it's awareness too, right? Like as you go through life, is just being aware of what works and what doesn't work,
Yeah.
and how you feel good and how you don't feel good, and and there's a big difference between selling off everything you own, I think, to start something new and take a risk on yourself. I mean, that's got to feel scary, and that's got to, there's a whole dynamic behind that. And then also selling off everything you own to pay off debt because you're over your head, right?
Yeah.
There's like, either way, you're selling off everything you own, but it's for a different purpose. And I think or even just for a dynamic change, like one of the things that I would say is like, throughout my career, I built, and you get in this MO of like, again, you're tying your identity and doing all your things to build. And then there was a certain point where I was like you said, where's enough is enough. And I started having these ahas of like where the pressure lived, where the stress lived, where whatever was in this, hey man, you're kind of like just in this mode of like more, building, like, but you don't need to be in that phase anymore. But then laying off of that, and whether it was just like not buying any more flips or slowing way down or getting out of my broke, it started to feel like I was doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Keith, like, what are you hiding from or what's wrong? And I was like, why should I feel guilt? Because I'm not buying 50 houses a year, right? Like, but that was like the modus operandi. Or in selling them, even if it was like not bad sales, like, oh, you've accrued these assets, now you can sell them and have a slower pace of life. But like feeling weird or guilty or this thing about selling. And it was like, I don't know, like that to me, again, it was a pause moment to be like, you need to self-psychoanalyze here of like what it is that you're making all this. In some way, shape, or form, it was losing, right? I was tying not growing, and actually, if I was just selling, even if it was just to make like some way Keith was losing, right? I was making that meaning up. It's weird. It's a weird deal.
Well, I think, what you're describing makes me think of a book Richard Rohr wrote. I think it's called The Wild Man's Journey of Faith. And he's revised it a little bit, shortened it up, and it's probably better shorter. But the fundamental premise is, and it's kind of about male spirituality, but it really probably applies to all humans. But just that there are seasons, chapters of life.
Yes.
So, you go through this chapter of initiation from boyhood into manhood, and then you go through this warrior phase, and you go through, this accumulation. I think he calls it building your tower phase. And the book, I read it years ago, but the basics of it stuck with me, because you get to an older, and I think I've entered that stage where I've gathered up, I look around, I make myself feel good by saying, well, I haven't gathered up as much crap as all these other people, but I've gathered up a lot of stuff. And I've shifted my thinking in the last few years. It's like it's a burden. Do I own this stuff, or does it own me?
Yeah.
And I spend all my time thinking about, I got to maintain it. I got to do this. And I look around, and there is a part of me that, and this isn't intense, but it's been a growing thought in my head. I just got too much stuff, and I just need to get rid of it, or at least a lot of it. And why did I even gather it up? And I kind of can vaguely remember the logical, mechanical part of it, the emotion that drove me to think that I needed more of this or more of that. It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's time to, get rid of a bunch of it and simplify. And I think, well, part of how I've sort of let myself off the hook on that is to say, I'm in a different stage of life now. It is time for that stuff to go. Yeah. And there was a time when it seemed like the right thing to do to gather it up. But, I think there's some ancient wisdom that maybe, rather than think I made a mistake then, it's just like, don't make a mistake now. Things have changed. It'd be a good idea. I'm not headed for a tiny home.
No. Keep your house a good house.
I think, there's a lot of truth to that. And again, happiness is a funny thing, and so it's about also knowing what makes you happy. And I think if that tiny home makes you happy, then go that direction. Yeah. I think if the stuff makes you happy, then go that direction. I think that's one of the keys for me is like trying to figure out what makes Keith happy, right? I think that's or all of us to some extent. There's those questions we don't like to ponder a whole lot or think about a whole lot. Is like, am I really happy? What is it that makes me happy or doesn't make me happy, or am I not happy? And I think that to me that's the growing process of getting older. It's you just a little bit more aware of that.
Yeah, and protective of that, honestly, because all of a sudden time becomes a thing, and So I think you're just tracking that even more closely.
Well, and going back to the conversation of gratitude is being grateful to even have that time.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I imagine there was generations before us where, like you said, there's the becoming a man phase or the youth and then there's the warrior. Well, guess what? A lot of them never lived out of that.
Yeah, that was the end,
right? Like they didn't have to worry about phase 3 or 4 of their life because they only got 2.
Yeah.
And maybe it was because they died being a warrior, but maybe it's because people just only lived to be like 38 years old, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's. Even that's a whole nother conversation of like, you talk about this lifelong wisdom and it's like, well, you know, Greg, we're looking at you saying, give us some of your wisdom, which is awesome. Back then, people were looking at a 35-year-old being like, hey, give me some wisdom. He's like, I don't know. I can't remember the first 4 or 5 years of my life and I've been fighting for the last 7. So
mid-fight,
nobody was like, what's retirement going to look like for you, George? He's like, retirement? I'm going to be dead in a year.
Yeah. We're looking to make it to 40.
I have an interesting gene pool. My dad's side of the family, you know, a lot of the men, you know, I was old. Yeah, I'm old in that context. My mom's side of the family, my mom's doing great. She's 94, but her older brother, who's 30 years older than me, has been cleaning up in the senior games for the last 30 years. He's a country vet from North Dakota. I don't think he'd ever been to a track meet till after he retired. And the way he described it, his doc said, you know, and I've always thought of my uncle as being pretty healthy, but the doc told him, you need to change some things. He said he started walking. He thought, well, if I could walk, maybe I could run. This is at about 60-some years old.
It's crazy.
And he's got more gold medals from the seniors game than he knows what to do with. I bet he could outrun me. Oh. I mean, I went to the meet. It was at Iowa State University, which is where he went to vet school last August. And he ran every event. He high jumped. He threw the discus. He long jumped. He ran.
How old is he?
He's 95.
Holy cow!
And
that's something to achieve.
And you know, and just cleaned up. He did the power lifting. He did every event because you know they do them in 5-year blocks. So he's the young guy in the 95 to 99 group now. And
raking that
but
one.
the camaraderie of the people, the participants, and just what they were doing was so inspiring.
Yeah.
And he and my aunt celebrated their 72nd wedding anniversary in December. 77. And think, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm retired, but I don't. You know, if I live that long and it keep going that long, I need to. I need to have a plan to, you know, stay out of the tiny home.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know,
that's right.
You know, but you just don't know. Mm-hmm. And you know. I was so inspired to look at these athletes doing what they were doing, and you know, around there. There was a group there that I think they were in their 70s. I've got a video. I won't dig it up, but they were smoking. Yeah. I think they were running the 400, and they were just flying around that track. And I think they're old. I'm thinking these guys are older than me, and they are moving. And now I don't know if they don't have a skiing event. That'd be the only one I can probably compete in. I think I
seen your winter.
Yeah, for my age, I think I can ski with most of the people my age, and probably out ski most of them. Yeah. You know, and you know, but I've got some buddies who I can't keep up with that are about the same age. Yeah. And or it's
this is something I've never thought of that now I'm intrigued in. Is I'm like, I've never thought of winning a gold medal, and I'm like maybe if you live long enough.
Yeah. Hit the 95 bracket.
Maybe if you live long enough, you could be a gold medalist, Keith.
My 94-year-old mother told me a couple of weeks ago that she's using a walker now, and you know, just some balance things, but she's active, she's you know all there and doing great. But she said, you know, they're going to have those senior games. They have them every 2 years, so it'll be another. About a year and a half. Yeah. She said, I'm thinking, is this crazy? I'm thinking I might enter in the powerlifting. She said, I can't run, but I think I can lift. You know, she was telling me I can lift weight. I look around and none of the other women here at this retirement home can lift the weight I can lift. I said, Mom, I think you should do it.
Yeah,
I think she should.
Get in there.
Where's it at in a year and a half?
Oklahoma City.
Oh, there we go.
So, strength is a huge longevity thing too.
Yeah, it's huge.
You know? Huge.
There's something I remember as a kid visiting North Dakota, and I like to say it's just east of the middle of nowhere. It's right on the North and South Dakota state line, just south of Jamestown, North Dakota. And the water there was basically orange out of the wells, and it stunk like sulfur. As a kid, that was one thing I didn't like and I couldn't deal with. You know, it's just I got to drink milk or pop or something else. But, the old saying, there's something in the water. Well, apparently there is.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. I look
Maybe
at
that wasn't sulfur. That's some other gym.
They weren't the only ones, of that little farming community that were that have lived amazingly capable, long lives. And is it farming? Is it just being outdoors? Is it eating food that you grew as opposed to food from a
so
store?
Many variables.
I mean, but a lot of people there, the ones that didn't smoke and drink themselves, to death.
Yeah.
There seemed to be a consistency of pretty long, healthy lives.
That's its own topic.
Yeah.
Maybe it's an overexposure to glyphosate.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
A little bit will kill you,
There's
but if you just drink it.
Well, they weren't using it though when they were young.
Yeah.
When did that come around?
They lived through it, right? That was the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, probably.
Yeah, and I think
Late 70s.
like my
80s.
grandparents sold the farm in '68 or '9,
Yeah.
so they weren't using it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why.
Yeah. Got out
Dodge
before
that
then.
bullet. Yeah. Well, Greg, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, this has
Appreciate
been
your time.
fun. Jordan and I have had a lot of conversations, and he knows I could talk all day.
Okay.
But
Well, that's
thanks for having
literally
me.
how this entire podcast spawned, was because Jordan and me would do this, and we would just do it over a beer or two, and then we'd be like, really, you should just start a podcast. And we probably said that for a year plus, So now we get to do that and do it with other people that,
Well, thanks for having me.
thank you so
enjoyed
much
it.
for being here. Appreciate it. All right, you guys, thanks for listening to today's episode. While you're out there, would you please do us a favor and give us a like, subscribe, or a follow, whether you listen on Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube. We'd really appreciate it. Also, if you don't mind while you're there, give us a 5-star review. Maybe write a review. If you have a favorite episode, feel free to give it a like. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate it.